Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for April 16th, 2025. Today I'm going to be talking about the difference between a sovereign republic and an empire. And the United States now has to choose whether it's going to be on the side of sovereign republics or continue to be an enforcer of an empire as it has been under recent presidents. Now, there's some very positive developments coming from the Trump administration on the side of sovereignty and working with other governments. Most interesting is the work of Steve Witkoff as a special envoy of President Trump, who just had a long meeting with President Putin on April 11th. And about this meeting, Witkoff told Fox News, "I think we might be on the verge of something that would be very, very important for the world at large." And he spoke about having to take some time. It was a 3-hour meeting, but having to take some time to work through the disruption of relations that was caused by the Obama and Biden administrations and by Russiagate and so on. But in the discussion, he spoke optimistically of the potential for economic cooperation on trade, finance, and so on. Now, in response to that, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, had a comment with some friendly advice. He was warning the U.S. must distance itself from the governments of Europe. And here's what he said. "We have already said that it has diverted from the path taken by the Europeans, that is, the United States has. They, the Europeans, have literally gone haywire in their frenzy. Primarily the leaders in France, Britain, the Baltics. Unlike the Europeans, Donald Trump's administration has been trying to get to the bottom of this issue, that is the Ukraine issue, and understand its root causes resulting from what Obama and Newland's Washington and Brussels did to bring the current regime to power by staging and sponsoring an anti-constitutional government coup in February 2014. And he went on to emphasize that it was one of the big mistakes was Biden's push to bring Ukraine into NATO. And so what you see from the Russian side, and also from what Witkoff is doing, is that normalization of relations means a fight against the way the Russians have been demonized, in particular the Russia of Russiagate, that Russia is interfering in the United States and elsewhere. Now, of course, it should be noted that the U.S. and Russia actually have a long history of cooperation, going back to the founding of our republic. Tsarina Catherine II, Catherine the Great, also as she's known, was part of the League of Armed Neutrality that was set up in Europe to help the United States against Britain in the American Revolution, by threatening to blockade the shipment of arms to the British troops coming from England. Tsar Alexander II, during the U.S. Civil War, also offered the Russian fleet to protect the United States from a potential to blockade the ports of the United States of the North. The British, by the way, were supporting the South. Then we were allies with Russia in World War I and World War II, and in fact, the Russians played a major role, significant role, as Trump has emphasized recently, in defeating the Nazis in World War II. So you have this history. Now, we're also seeing a discussion in Russia, and included in the BRICS, and the Russians are one of the leading initiators of the BRICS alliance, a discussion of the importance of Alexander Hamilton's approach to economics, along with the other Hamiltonian figures like Friedrich List in Germany and Sergei Witte of Russia, who was the sponsor of a program for the Trans-Siberian Railroad modeled on what Lincoln did with the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States. So you have this affinity for the idea of infrastructure, great projects, control of credit by the government over the power of private interests to make sure the money gets to the hands, or credit gets to the hands of producers. Now, this also relates to the agreement between Trump and Putin on the idea of the importance of sovereign nations versus globalization. I've said a lot about this recently, and we'll be saying more about it. But the globalization policy is that of the British Empire, of knocking down sovereign protection of nations and forcing the cheap labor policies of the global South to allow for the outsourcing of the former industrialized nations of the global North. Putin instead has been committed to building industry and science and technology in Russia, as have the Chinese. And this is the tradition of the United States, which we have abandoned. So there's something we can learn from this relationship. Now, we're also seeing a reflection of this in the defense that Vice President Vance did of the Georgescu candidacy in Romania. Remember, Georgescu came in first in the Romanian election, and the Supreme Court of Romania did away with that election under pressure from the European Union. Why? Because they said his election was influenced by Russian meddling. But I hope you had a chance to watch Georgescu interviewed by Tucker Carlson. He spoke of his love of the idea of the American system of economics, especially Alexander Hamilton. And the fact that he's being supported by Vance and others is significant, because this is the fight that's going on in the world. Do we have sovereign nation states that can control their credit, and as opposed to letting the international cartels run the governments? That's the fight. That's what the fight for sovereignty is about. Now, the problem in the U.S. is there's a split on this. There's a support for a policy approach which undermines the tradition of sovereign republics. And the issue is the role of governments. With Hamilton, the government was not supposed to control everything, but what was important was to protect the interests of the common good against the private special interests. The idea, as Lincoln put it, government of, by, and for the people, meaning that the people, through their elected representatives, decide which policies governments should adopt. Instead, we have corporatism, which is another name for fascism, where corporate cartels take over and control government for their own benefit. And we've seen this in the post-1971 period, where there have been repeated bubbles to provide liquidity for the corporate cartels. They get bailed out if their businesses go bad. If the industrial production, if the small and medium-sized enterprises have problems, they get put into bankruptcy. So we can see that the corporations are controlling governments as opposed to governments regulating corporations. Now, there are two examples I'll just present quickly. One is the visit of the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to Argentina. Bessent, as you probably know, made a fortune working with George Soros, speculating against nation states, speculating against currencies. The two most important ones were his attack on the British pound, which made Soros more than $1 billion, and his attack on the Japanese yen, both of which were run by Bessent. Now, he just went to Argentina and praised what Milei is doing. And this is a weak spot for a lot of people in the MAGA movement, because the idea that you take a chainsaw to government is popular because there's a lot of bad government. However, the real story of what's happening there is not covered in the U.S. press. And I'll be linking an article by my colleague Dennis Small, which goes through what actually has happened with Milei's chainsaw. But just a couple of points here. Massive increase in poverty. The national poverty has grown by 27%, numbers of people living under the poverty level in Argentina since Milei became president. Extreme poverty has grown by 52%. There are 53% now, or 25 million people, who are poor. Child poverty is now at 69% in Argentina. And public debt has grown by 90%. I thought the chainsaw was supposed to cut out public debt. No, it's increased the public debt and turned over the resources of Argentina to private looters. That's what Milei is all about, and I urge you to read the article by Dennis Small to get the real story as opposed to the line that comes out in the media. Now, one other aspect of this was the unfortunate comments of Vice President Vance about Donald Trump's affinity for Great Britain. In an interview on April 13th, what Vance said is, the president really loves the United Kingdom. He loved the Queen. He admires and loves the King. I mean, King Charles is a kook. He's a radical population reduction advocate. Vance went on to say that the relationship with the United Kingdom is a very important relationship. And he, Trump, is a businessman and has a number of important business relationships in Britain. But I think it's much deeper than that. There's a real cultural affinity. And of course, fundamentally, America is an Anglo country, unquote, from Vice President Vance. No, it's not an Anglo country. We made a revolution against the British. We fought against the British system throughout the history of the United States. And every advance we've had has been with the Hamiltonian American system versus the British oligarchy, private corporate cartels, and so on. So this is a fight that has to be waged, and people need to be prepared to wage it. So I'm going to be linking again the Schiller Institute report on what we can do to overcome the crisis caused by the British policy of globalization. Secondly, the article on Milei in Argentina. And let me encourage you to put on your calendar for tomorrow, Thursday, at 11 a.m., an interview and a dialogue between Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Chaz Freeman, one of the most significant members of the U.S. diplomatic corps from the last 50 years, going back to Nixon's trip to China. So thanks for joining me. Take these fights seriously, and we'll see you again tomorrow.